No. No. It need not rely upon human transformation, but you said, Krishnamurti said, right, somewhere in your quest.
Yes.
How would you know unless you read Krishnamurti?
Yes.
So, you see that? So sometimes it is required, because what people have felt, they have spoken. Krishnamurti hardly wrote a book. I mean, he spoke, so it was recorded.
Yes.
I think he wrote only one or two small books which he tried, finished and gave up very fast doing that. So I know. So, yes, some people may, this is why I'm saying that some people are different from others, all are not the same. There was another great teacher called Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who was the guru of the well-known Swami Vivekananda, who went west and so on. Now, what I'm trying to say is there are sensitive individuals who probably don't need to read or understand anything. But I think for normally, one needs even to know that there is something, you need to read something or listen to something. So it's not that it is the most important, but information in some way is important. I know when you reach that, you're beyond all information. And in today's world, it's futile to carry too much information in our heads because Google God is there. It may be wrong sometimes, but generally not. So the ultimate idea, of course, even if you learn something, what you learn is how to dispose of what you learned. Very important. You know, there was a person who you would call, in India we call them fakirs. You know, fakir, sometimes even magicians are called fakirs. There was it's like, what is the English word for fakir? An itinerant wanderer, a holy man, a mendicant, whatever. There was one such person who sat in Shirdi, a fakir. And nobody knew he was Hindu, Muslim, nobody knew. Sometimes he said Ram, Ram, sometimes he said Allah, Allah, and so on. And nobody thought he has been educated or knew anything about the Upanishads or Vedas, anything of the kind. He always sat like this, with a cloth tied on his head. Okay? So one day, two scholars were sitting in front of him and discussing something about knowledge. He was just sitting there quietly. The subject was, is knowledge important? Two pundits, of course, people who have studied all this from Maharashtra. Is knowledge important? The other guy said, no, experience is important. You have to discard knowledge. Should we? So suddenly, this man who was listening to this conversation, he piped in. He said, look, 1 second. He said, I have not read all these things, but if you're walking in the garden and there's a thorn that gets stuck in your heel, you get pain. Now you need to get the thorn out. So you may pick up another thorn and pry this out. So after prying it out, do you throw both away or do you stick the second fellow in? What do you do? He said, well, we throw both away. He said, this is the same thing. Ignorance needs to be removed with knowledge. After it is removed, throw both out. They were shocked because they never thought this man who's with a cloth tied around his head sitting there would have known anything about these matters. So how did he know? He didn't study, he didn't. So it is there, but it's very rare. It's very rare. Even if to know about this, we need to know about this guy. So how do you know? By reading or listening Only thing is, don't give too much importance to this gathering of information. But it has its role, it has its part to play. Now I'm going to say something interesting. There is one of the greatest of the Upanishads. I was imitating somebody and my leg got stuck. There was, I lost it.
An interesting story.
Yeah. There is an Upanishad called the Mundaka Upanishad. It's one of the principal Upanishads. In this Upanishad, a young man goes to a great teacher and asks him, tell me about knowledge. So the teacher says, there are two kinds of knowledge. There is the higher knowledge and there is the lower knowledge. So the student says, the student himself is an accomplished person. He says, okay, so can you give me a list of lower knowledge so that I can be sure that I understand higher knowledge? You give me a list of lower knowledge, I'll avoid it. Then I'll understand the higher knowledge. You will be shocked. This is from the Upanishad, Shruti. I am not saying this. The list starts like this. Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvana Veda, Jyotisha. You know, the whole system that we think is required to understand. The truth is listed out as lower knowledge. So this guy is totally confused. So he says, so what is higher knowledge? So the teacher says the higher knowledge is that which leads you to the truth. Now, one second. Which does not mean that you are not supposed to study this. You study it with the understanding that is leading you to that which is beyond. You see. For instance, if I didn't read the Mundaka Upanishad, how would I know that this is there? I wouldn't. So, what they're trying to say is, even if you know all these things, if it is not leading you to the truth, it's lower knowledge. Not that you should. I hope you get what we are trying to say. So, in the same Upanishad, in one place, the Rishi says that those who have read everything, but who have not understood, which means still in the lower knowledge, when they become teachers, they are like, you would have thought that this particular thing I'm going to say comes from Shakespeare. No. 2000 years ago, the Mundaka Upanishad says such teachers like Andhai naiva niyamana yatandaha, like the blind leading the blind. Yeah. Can I also little bit more talk on this a bit? It is important. It's important. There was a great man called Ganapati Shastri. He was a famous poet and a great scholar and a Sri Vidya Upasaka. Nowadays it's become a problem with me. Anybody who meets me suddenly pops up, can you teach me Sri Vidya? So he was all this put together. And then he felt that with all these things, he was known as Kavyakanta Ganapati Shastri, which means Ganapati, who is a great scholar. His name was Ganapati. And Kavyakanta, jewel of poets and so on. Big man. But he always felt that with all this knowledge and learning and tantra and everything, there was some obstacle between him and the truth. There was something which was barring him from understanding the truth. So he was in the search of a teacher who would kind of help him get out of this. He went to Tiruvannamalai. Somebody told him, this Ramana Maharshi was unknown at that time. Somebody told him, on the cave up there is a young man sitting there. He looks like a rishi. Perhaps he can solve your problem. So he went up. When he went up, Ramana was sitting with his eyes open, but he didn't see him. His eyes were open, but they were not registering anything. Have you seen any one picture, anybody of Ramana Maharshi with closed eyes? No. There was no going in or coming out. So, he was sitting there. Long time he waited. Must say that he was very patient for being a famous man. And then he looked at him, zeroed in on him. And then this man said, prostrations to you. Then he did this. You know, Ramana Maharshi hardly talked. He didn't speak much. So he put his hand up, like, which means what? What do you want? In India, this is a gesture. What do you want? He was waiting for this signal. He started. It took him 10 minutes or 15 minutes to finish. I did this, I did that, I studied this, I studied that, I did this. The whole thing like a verbal diarrhea. The whole thing came out. And then he asked him, now what should I do? This is a typical, beautiful answer from Ramana Maharshi. He said, for 5 minutes, can you just shut up? You know what? In Tamil, he said, "Konja neram chumma irukka mudiyuma." Can you just shut up for a while? Keep quiet. Because he's got so much caught up in his knowledge and so on that the mind doesn't have any rest. If the mind doesn't rest, how will it touch the truth? So when you listen to Krishnamurti, you must also take it that way. It's not that you should do this or that, but you should understand that ultimately it has all to go and become quiet. This is what he's trying to say. People may say, I know, I've lived with him, we have said, you know, I didn't have a recorder at that time, anyway they wouldn't have let me record it. I wish I had. I am witness to a statement from Krishnamurti. I said that as the national convention in Adyar. He said, K never denied the masters. What do you say? He said, yes, he denied the caricatures they had made out of them. But K never denied them. When somebody wanted to talk, he said, shut up. Darling, you don't know anything about it. Don't talk. So there are many things to look. There was one more question.